Hello and welcome again to Battersea Library. Now I'll be talking a bit about black entertainers on the Victorian stage. We know a great deal about 20th century entertainers from various parts of the globe, but we know less about black Victorians. There were quite a few more than I could have imagined when I started this work. The main wave of black entertainers in the 19th century actually came after about 1870, and they were nearly all from America because they had better opportunities here in Britain, and also appearing in Britain gave them a bit of class when they returned home. So despite the abolition of slavery, after the end of the Civil War in America in 1865, there was still a huge amount of prejudice and discrimination in both in the southern states and in the north. But a few black people actually arrived earlier than 1865. They've been appearing on stage on plays in British stages for centuries, like various Shakespearean roles. Othello is the major one that of course everybody knows. There was Aaron in Titus Andronicus, and there are a huge number of black characters in plays which were popular in their time but are now forgotten. But these were performed, we think, although we don't actually know, by white actors in blackface makeup. Although there is a record of a black actress in the 18th century who played Juliet and other roles. Then in 1825, Ira Aldridge, who was born in New York, arrived in Britain because he couldn't make it as an actor in America. The African theatre in New York was wrecked by local people who didn't want this to take place. And when he arrived in Britain, he claimed to be the son of an African prince because the British always love a lord. And he played mainly Shakespearean roles, notably Othello. Up till then, this role had been played as a Moor, an Arab, and Aldridge seems to be the first to play him as a sub-Saharan African, which caused a lot of disturbance at the time. Reviews were mixed. Some people weren't impressed, others praised him, but he was still very young and inexperienced at this point. He toured Britain, meeting some prejudice there, but building a reputation as a good actor as he added other roles to his repertoire. In this picture here on the right, he is shown as Aaron in the tragedy Titus Andronicus by Shakespeare. And on the left, he's Mungo in The Padlock, which was a comic role. Later he toured Europe, where he was rapturously received, and he died in Poland. Now, Ira Aldridge almost acted in roles where the character was black, although he did play King Lear at one point. But the next actor to arrive from America, Samuel Morgan Smith, who was generally known as S. Morgan Smith, played all kinds of parts, like Hamlet, Macbeth, a French gardener, and even Cardinal Richelieu, a powerful politician in 17th century France. Initially, some people were surprised to see a black actor in these roles, but they quickly got over it. He never actually attained the fame of Aldridge, but he had a long career in the British provinces. He was a good jobbing actor, but lacked that bit of extra magic, the stardust of Aldridge, and he was only 5'6", so he didn't actually come across as quite so impressive. Bernard Linfors has written his biography, as well as a biography of Ira Aldridge. There were a few other black actors who tried to make it in Britain, but were just very unlucky or not good enough. Gustavus Attenborough called himself the coloured tragedian, advertised himself in 1866 as having concluded highly successful engagements at Woolwich and Northampton, and to be available for work. His repertoire, he sent, consisted of Othello, The Black Doctor, The Slave, etc. Nothing seems to have resulted from this, and there seem to be no references to him acting anywhere at all. George Gross arrived from America, very keen, advertising himself as the successor to Aldridge, and he called himself the celebrated African tragedian. And he was advertised that he would play Othello at the new Royal Adelphi Theatre in Liverpool. but he was actually too young for this role. He was only about 20, and it didn't really come off. The only other mention of him acting comes in East London, and then he disappears. Presumably disappointed, he went back to America. Paul Molino, the next to arrive, was very well connected. He was the brother of one of Frederick Douglass's daughters-in-law. Douglass was a famous abolitionist. He had toured England and was very, very well known here. And so we know quite a lot about Paul Molino from the letters that he wrote to him. Molino arrived in Britain before 1881, and he scraped a living in minor roles until he decided to tackle both Othello and Richard II in his own productions. These did not go down very well. Richard II was delayed because somebody turned up demanding payment for the costumes. So after that, the parts dried up, and he gave lessons in self-defense. He was about to return to America, but then he got offered a part in Uncle Tom's Cabin, where he played a slave hunter. He went back to America after this. After he was with Uncle Tom's Cabin for a very long time. He did a long tour, and then went back to America with an English wife. Uncle Tom's Cabin was an extraordinary success. It's now very, very few people read it, but it was the bestseller of its day. In 1851, Harriet Beecher Stowe, the wife of a minister in the northern states of America, wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. Actually, she started it as a series in a magazine, and it was then published as a novel. It came to Britain in 1852 and became one of the bestsellers of all time. Very quickly, stage productions appeared. And for over 50 years, it was a popular drama everywhere. There was never a single time in those 50 years when you could not see it somewhere in Britain. Initially, the roles were taken by white actors in blackface because there were simply not enough black actors in Britain to fill the demand. From 1878, productions from America featuring genuinely black actors began to tour Britain. The first ones, however, still have white actors in the role of Uncle Tom. These productions then provided employment for many black actors, actresses and performers. Most of them were American, but some were British. It's quite difficult to sort out who was who because in the reviews of the time, people don't always mention either nationality or colour. As well as the most dramatic episodes from the novel, there was a final scene, a celebration on a plantation, which consisted of all kinds of song and dance acts, as well as comedians. These weren't in the book. This whole scene, this entertainment, was drawn from the traditions of minstrelsy. There were regular advertisements in the era, the trade paper for the entertainment industry, for black performers. If they could hack these long, demanding tours, they were virtually guaranteed regular employment. A number of entertainers in Britain began their careers in this play. Others were in it all their professional lives, a bit like being in a soap opera. Now, the part of Uncle Tom, the actors in Uncle Tom's Cabin, the actual part of Uncle Tom himself is not actually very demanding. He just has to suffer nobly. There were two main touring productions. In one, Uncle Tom was played by George Closs Walmer, probably American, but it's not entirely certain, and he seems to have arrived in Britain as a piano player and then found a job as an actor. He died on tour in 1897, and the role was taken over by a man called Bentinck Rowe until 1800. Now, I haven't been able to find out any more about him. I don't even know whether he was black or white. All I know is that he took over the role. Bill Edwards was the other one in the other main production, but he was actually born in Antigua, and he first appeared in a world tour of Uncle Tom's Cabin in 1868. It did not arrive in Britain, this whole world tour did not arrive in Britain until 1883, so he was playing the part all that time as they toured the world, which is an indication of how very, very fashionable, how important, how popular this whole play was. He did play other parts as well. He played Man Friday in a pantomime in 1891. He then played in a French farce the following year, and he set up his own production company to tour with Uncle Tom's Cabin. There were actresses too who made their name in Uncle Tom's Cabin. Nellie Shannon and Mary St. Just both played Topsy. In the novel, it's a comic character, a small child, but she's usually played on the English stage as a mature woman because of the difficulty of employing child actors, partly the regulations and partly the ability. Nellie Shannon was an American, and she had a very long career in Britain. She actually arrived and started in music halls as a singer and comedian. She then joined the Bohee Brothers tour, but she and another singer were dismissed for having a drink in a pub with a white man after a matinee. The Bohee Brothers ran a respectable tour, and they were not having this kind of behaviour. Nellie and the other singer actually sued the Bohee Brothers for this, but the magistrates agreed with the Bohees that they should be running a respectable show. So the Bohee Brothers were actually born in Canada, and then they moved to Boston, Massachusetts, where they learned to play the banjo. They came to England in the 1880s. They then taught the Prince of Wales, who was later Edward VII, to play the banjo, so they called themselves the Royal Bohee Brothers, and they organised a concert party of all black performers which toured the country. After her dismissal, Nellie went back to the halls, but then she acted in a play, and she finally joined Uncle Tom's Cabin, mainly playing Topsy, but occasionally playing Tom's wife, Aunt Chloe. She was with the production where she played opposite George Walmer. Also, she played in the Octoroon, which was a straight play, which the same company staged from time to time. Mary St. Just, who was with the Bohee Brothers tour, and in 1892 she joined Uncle Tom's Cabin. Now, one of the difficulties, as I said earlier, about identifying colour is simply that it's often not mentioned in reviews. The only time Mary St. Just's colour is identified is when she stole a bracelet, and she was charged with this in court. I think at this point she pleaded guilty. She was 19 at that point, but then I think she was sacked from the show. I'm not quite happened to her afterwards. The last mention of her comes in 1899 when she was acting in a pantomime in Beverley, Yorkshire. Now, someone else who acted in Uncle Tom's Cabin was Esther, known as Hetty Johnson. She was actually born in Birmingham, but she was the daughter of an American singer who came to England. She played Eliza in Uncle Tom's Cabin and later married John Caviller, a black actor in the same company. Now, Cassie Walmer became an actress too. She was George Walmer's daughter. She appeared as an extra in Uncle Tom's Cabin when she was 3. In fact, he was charged with contravening regulations because she was underage to appear on stage. But as George Walmer explained, they didn't have a babysitter, so they put her in the bed on stage where she played one of the children in the play. She had a very long and successful career as an actor in the early 20th century. The photograph I have here comes from Stephen Bourne, who has done a great deal of research on various performers in Britain in the 19th and 20th century. Amy Height is someone else that Stephen's done a lot of work on. She was a singer and actress. She dropped into a couple of productions of Uncle Tom's Cabin, but she was mainly a singer in music halls and then later appeared as an actor in pantomimes and straight plays. She was extremely popular, very, very well known. There were 2 others, again, the actors who didn't quite make it, and there were their equivalent in female actors. Henrietta Davis was a young black woman who had been studying in America and then came to Britain wanting to play Shakespearean roles like Juliet, but this came to nothing, unfortunately, and nothing more is known about her. We only know about Florence Lawrence. She was charged with theft in Lincoln. She claimed to have acted in a touring production of Uncle Tom's Cabin and then worked in a factory. Again, nothing more is known about her. She may have been someone who fancied acting but wasn't quite good enough. And also, I think her name, I haven't been able to trace any Florence Lawrence about the right age and the right place. I think that might have been her stage name, but we know nothing more about her. Now, I mentioned that the last scene in Uncle Tom's Cabin was a plantation celebration in minstrel style. In America, performers in minstrel shows wore coarse clothes and presented a stereotypical picture of black people as not very bright and idle, but also happy. Minstrel songs crossed the Atlantic to Britain from the 1840s, and then people started to appear in minstrelsy acts with comic characters as well as the songs. Now, the great difference was between America and Britain was that Britain had no slavery. They did not have black people in a particular role in coarse clothes and such like. Now, the minstrel shows here, the coloured opera troupe, who were one of the very early troupes in Britain, they wore 18th century court dress. And this, as Americans found, was one of the great differences between the United Kingdom and their homeland. Again, in America, minstrel troupes were either, initially they were all white in blackface makeup, but then black troupes started to appear, but they also used burnt cork makeup. It was a sort of style that more than anything else. However, in Britain, both races appeared in the same theatres at the same time and in the same troupes, and it is extraordinarily difficult to sort out which of them was black and which of them was white in makeup. Reviews very rarely mention their colour, and official documents in Britain have no colour classification either. Now, this is a postcard here from 1906. Minstrels in Britain continued to wear this upper class fancy dress from the coloured opera troupe onwards. This postcard was one of a series that was first produced in 1906. Now, I have found one British mixed race singer called Tom Gordon. He had a very long career as a singer and then a comedian in minstrel style shows. He was never mentioned as an American. His colour wasn't always mentioned either. But as this was regarded as so prestigious in Britain at the time, I think he must have been British. But it's an indication of how difficult it is to sort out colour and race. He had a long and moderately successful career, but because his name, Tom Gordon, is so common, I've been unable to find out any more about him. Although minstrelsy was a really popular form of entertainment, the most important singers who came to Britain from America were the Fisk Jubilee Singers, who introduced the Negro spiritual to the world. And they challenged the stereotypes of minstrelsy and Uncle Tom's Cabin. The Fisk Jubilee Singers were a choir from Fisk College in Nashville, Tennessee, who first of all toured America to raise money for their college. Then they came to Britain in 1873. They were unbelievably popular. People flocked to them. They raised over $10,000, which was, that's at the time, and that was a really serious amount of money. They did 3 tours of Britain in total, and also went to Europe, and finally did a world tour. This photograph here is from their second tour, and they are looking very fed up. They had internal quarrels, they fell out with their managers. The whole thing of being 24/7 with people all the time is a great strain. Other choirs, seeing their success, followed them, and they also found touring a bit of a problem. After the Jubilee Singers, the Fisk Jubilee Singers, returned home to America, 3 stayed on in Britain. Thomas Rutling tried a solo career, but he wasn't very successful. He did sort of various concerts and such like, and he taught singing in Yorkshire. It wasn't that he was black that was the problem, it was that there was too much competition. There were very, very many good singers at that time, and male singers were not that. Female singers, sopranos, are always much more in demand. Isaac Dickerson, who was also a singer, actually stayed on to study theology, and then he became a temperance campaigner and specialising in women because he always appealed to the ladies. He worked in South London. Mattie Lawrence was a woman who was with the third Jubilee tour, and she married a businessman in Croydon. After her marriage, she occasionally appeared at charity dues and other social events in the town. Her father-in-law was very important in the local Chamber of Commerce, and she often acted as his hostess on official functions. Now, I've mentioned various choirs. However, there were solo singers who came to Britain quite early. Among the first, in fact possibly the first, was Elizabeth Greenfield. She was known as the Black Swan, and she was an operatic soprano who also sang popular songs. Like the Fisks, she challenged the stereotypes of minstrelsy at Uncle Tom's Cabin. She was born into slavery in Natchez, Mississippi, but had grown up in Pennsylvania, where she was freed. She started singing professionally in America in 1851 and came to Britain in 1853, at the same time as Harriet Beecher Stowe arrived here. The two were friends. Here, Elizabeth Greenfield was given lessons by Queen Victoria's organist. She had not been able to get professional lessons in America because of prejudice, but in Britain, Queen Victoria's organist taught her to sing, gave her lessons, and she also appeared before Queen Victoria. So when she returned to the USA, the royal link was very good for her career there. Seeing the success of the Fisks, various other Jubilee choirs arrived. The Wilmington Jubilee Choir was started to raise money for their college in Raleigh, Virginia. They arrived in Britain in 1876, but they fell out with each other very, very soon. And they actually fell out with their manager too and split into two particular groups. Then some singers fell out with the rest of their group and went off to set up as a trio. It's difficult to keep track of them all, and I must say I haven't done as much work as I could on this. The Mississippi Jubilee Singers was one of these groups that split off from the Wilmingtons, but they don't seem to have been terribly successful. The Virginia Jubilee Singers arrived in 1880 to tour Scotland. Paul Molino, the actor who I mentioned earlier, was their tour manager for a while. Then there was the Alabama Coloured Singers, who appeared in 1890, but they performed a great deal in nonconformist churches. I don't know much more about them. All that you find are mentions of them appearing. And a group called the Jubilee Singers simply traded on the name. We know nothing more about them, but lots of groups were possibly using the same name. The Tennessee Choir arrived en route for Germany. One of the Wilmingtons, who had remained in Britain when they returned to America, joined them for a while, but stayed in England after they left for Germany because he was married to an English woman. Even various non-slave states got in on the bandwagon. The Pennsylvania Jubilee Singers toured churches in Britain, but you may be ahead of me here, they fell out as well and split into two. About 1890, one of these groups had the bright idea of making a sacred service of song called Eva, which was based on Uncle Tom's Cabin. So they were getting into this sort of fashionable thing as well. And they were accompanied by the latest innovation, a magic lantern show. They toured with this and their original program of slave songs and were very, very popular with this for about 8 years. The breakaway group called themselves the American Coloured Singers and weren't as popular. They didn't have a magic lantern either. There were a number of other groups with Jubilee in their names who pop up from time to time. It's not always clear what colour they were. As it turned out, there was a Jubilee choir in Belfast who were white, as I discovered after looking through several pages. Anyway, so there were various other Jubilee choirs. These were the main ones, but there were others. The Anglo-African choir was set up by a fraudster. He was probably called David Nero, who came from Demerara, today's Guyana. He became a teacher in Kansas, and then he came to Britain and used a number of aliases to con people out of money. He was sentenced to 6 months hard labour in Manchester in 1885. On his release, he seems to have decided to go straight, and he set up the Anglo-African choir. They did okay, but he was sued by one of the singers for breach of contract, and then everything unfortunately went a bit pear-shaped. I'm not yet certain what happened to him or his choir. The South African choir actually arrived from the British colony of South Africa. They were a group of 16 young singers who toured Britain between June 1891 and 1893, and they too appeared before Queen Victoria. While they were here, a series of beautiful photographs of them were taken and published in the Illustrated London News. The originals are now in the Holton Library, and they appeared in an exhibition at an organisation called Autograph, and also in South Africa. You can see some of these on this website. I'll mention one last colonial choir. The Jamaica Native Choir arrived in 1806 and toured for a couple of years. These are after Queen Victoria's death, so they're not strictly speaking on the Victorian stage, but it just shows how much interest there was in these various music traditions at that time. As I mentioned earlier, there was a lot of stress, strain and breakups within all the various choirs, and some singers with these choirs left to form small groups or to go solo. Of these various small groups, the Louisiana Quartet were the most successful. They arrived actually with an Uncle Tom's Cabin company, not a choir, and then had a very long period working in music halls. They occasionally dropped into various productions of Uncle Tom's Cabin for the plantation scene, and they appeared also in pantomimes, even appearing at one point in Robin Hood among the outlaws in Sherwood Forest. I'm not certain. As I say, they had a long, very successful career, and they seem to have returned to America about 1900. In 1887, a group called the Mississippi Singers arrived from America, hoping to cash in on the popularity of the Jubilee choirs, but they didn't have very much success. And 3 of them, Pauline Cushman, her husband Ike Jones, and her daughter Josie Rivers, did very well indeed in music halls as the Black Swan Trio, but they also performed their own separate acts. Ike was a comedian, Pauline sang opera arias, and Josie at one point became a male impersonator. Now they were very, very successful. They were very, very well received. They were in constant employment until Pauline died in 1894. She seems to have been the linchpin of the choir. She was the one with the best voice. Her husband then teamed up with two men, and her daughter went solo. The Fisk Jubilee Trio were set up by Eugene McAdoo, who had been a genuine member of the Fisk Choir, and he joined up with 2 other female singers, Una Macara and Laura Carr. All of them been singing together with different companies for many years until they actually formed themselves into the Fisk Jubilee Trio to cash in on the name, and they formed up in 1904. I mentioned that that there were also solo singers on the British stage, and seeing how well received Black Americans were in Britain, many came here for a brief period simply to say that they had performed in Europe, because this gave them such kudos when they returned to their homes. There were a group who were called African Nightingales, And the first who was called the African Nightingales was someone called Georgie Allen. She had been with her Uncle Tom's Cabin production in America, but then toured Britain singing solo in various music halls. Jessie Green was the next to arrive. She was the next African Nightingale. She was a soloist with the Virginia Jubilee Singers and seems to have done solo concerts as well. I think she was one of those who split off from them and went elsewhere, because shortly afterwards her title of African Nightingale was inherited by Nellie White, who was also with the Virginia Singers. Now, Maria Ewing, called the African Princess, she was the other singer who'd been dismissed from the Bohee Brothers tour, along with Nellie Shannon, but she was less successful than Nellie. There were also various operatic sopranos who came here very briefly, again to say that they had appeared in Europe. One was called Salika. That was her professional name. She was actually Mary Smith from Mississippi, and she appeared in Britain just as part of an operatic tour of Europe. And Cicerietta Jones, who was born Matilda Joyner in Virginia, toured Europe with her husband, who was another singer, and she too briefly came to Britain. Now, so far I've mentioned actors, and I have rather concentrated on singers, but there were many black people who entertained in other ways, and I particularly want to mention Henry Box Brown. He had been a slave, and after his wife and 3 children were sold, he decided to escape from the south to the north in America, and he was nailed in a crate and posted. It took 27 hours to travel from Richmond, Virginia to Philadelphia, and at various times he thought he would die. He spent a while upside down until someone luckily righted the box. Now, this extraordinary and novel method of escape made him very famous, and it caught the public imagination. So from Henry Brown, he became known as Henry Box Brown. In 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act was passed in America. This made it very, very difficult, because even those who had escaped to the north could be returned to the south and to slavery. And so, like many, many others, he came to Britain. He started out, like others, speaking about abolition. He lectured all over England, and then in 1855 he married a Cornish school teacher, and she introduced, I think it was her who was the inspiration for this, other subjects. And so they toured, speaking about abolition, speaking about the Holy Land, and then keeping up with events. They lectured about the Indian Mutiny and the American Civil War. Then, for some reason, Henry threw all this over and reinvented himself as a mesmerist. He did a hypnotism act on stage, and then he did a magic act. And I think he is the first black man to have a magic act on the British stage. There is no other. He was the first. So he, as I say, oh yes, and he also had a go at acting. He tried acting twice, but he wasn't very successful. But he was the ultimate entertainer, because he tried always to do this. Another entertainer in an extraordinary field was an American called Carlos Trower. He was an American known as the African Blondin. He walked a high wire between various sort of landmarks around Britain. He also appeared in America on the high wire. But here he is in a postcard of him in Rocherville Gardens in Kent. This was a popular, public park where people went to be entertained. He had a long and successful career of this, and a descendant of his has set up a website which you can access. There were numerous circus acts involving black people, but a man called Pablo Fanck owned and ran his own circus. He was actually born William Darby in Norwich, and one of his posters advertising a performance for the benefit of Mr. Kite inspired a Beatles song, where performers were most popular in circus was as lion tamers. Having a black lion tamer, because of the association with Africa in a circus, was really, really prestigious. Most of them adopted an exotic name. Sargano Alikamusa, who was born in 1859, was originally either John or possibly Alexander Humphreys, and he came from St. Vincent in the Caribbean. He claimed to have travelled with a British naval officer from St. Vincent to Africa, where they went lion hunting, and then he brought the lion cubs to England, where he joined a circus. Well, I don't know how true this is, but that was his story. Martini Macomo may have been a genuine African. He may have been born in Angola, but possibly he was Arthur Williams from the West Indies, or he may have been from South Africa and a Zulu. And he is also, some people claim, came to Liverpool as a sailor. So the next one, Ledger del Monaco, was actually American. He was born free in Delaware as Joseph Ledger, or possibly Hollinger. Later, he gave up lion taming and became an actor. Now, there were many, many others. Just about every menagerie, every circus wanted to have a black lion tamer. So I can't list them all. There were very, very many. I just want to mention the last one, the most unfortunate one. His name was Alexander Beaumont, and he was appearing on Boxing Day in 1895 at Wombwell's Menagerie in Islington, when he was attacked by a lion who had previously, it seemed quite, peaceful. Now, he died not actually from his wounds, but from blood poisoning, because cats' mouths, whatever their size, are seriously unhealthy. So I've just realised I'm finishing there on a really sad story. But what I want to say is how there were so many black performers on the Victorian stage all over the country, not just London, not just Liverpool, not just the main centres, but almost everybody could have seen someone black on the stage wherever you lived. It's an area which hasn't yet been much researched. I mentioned Stephen Bourne earlier. He's doing some work on this, and I too have started to look into this really fascinating story, but there's a great deal more to be discovered.